Hey everyone, this is Dominic with the Comic Book Report, inviting back the great Joe Casey. Welcome, Joe.
Thanks, man. How you doing?
Good. And before we get too far, just a huge thank you to those at Dynamite for making this interview happen. I don't like to bury the lead in the interviews. So if it's okay with you, Joe, I thought we'd go ahead and get started with what's bringing us together tonight. What can you tell me about Space Quest over at Dynamite?
Well, it's Jonny Quest and Space Ghost and their respective casts together for the first time in comic book form. I think in any kind of form, really. But yeah, big event crossover time.
I love that. And I know that you've been working on Jonny Quest. What of the Jonny Quest part of it all are you hoping to bring to Space Quest? Is this considered in canon, or is this playing in its own sandbox, or a little bit of both?
Well, this was originally, my original plan was this was going to be the second arc of our Jonny Quest run. And when we got to it, the fine folks at Dynamite decided to kind of break it off into its own series and, milk that new number one for all it's worth.
I love that. I don't know if you can speak to this or not. I apologize for not vetting this myself, but is this a limited series, an ongoing, a one shot? What are we thinking for Space Quest?
It's 4 issues, 4 glorious
Awesome.
issues of 4 color splendor.
Awesome. I honestly think these two franchises are going to get along quite well. I'm pretty excited. Um,
Oh yeah,
I guess for me, as a fan of both of these properties, I'm a big fan of the animated series, obviously, and I know Dynamite's done tremendous work with yourself over at Jonny Quest, and I've heard really good things about this Space Ghost run they've had going on. So when I heard about this
yep.
crossover, I'm definitely pretty eager. Can you tell me anything about what you're hoping to do, like, or any kind of teases for where you're hoping to go with this collaboration?
Well, it's if you look at the both concepts or both casts of characters, there's a lot of similarities. There's 2 youngsters, there's a cute pet, there's
Yep.
the heroic lead. And so when I made those connections and saw those easy comparisons, I thought, well, this is a way into this story. So, a bulk of the story deals with kind of interchanging cast members
Yeah.
to put certain cast members in certain scenarios that they're not used to, but fit perfectly well, and vice versa. So in this case, we get from the Jonny Quest side, we get Johnny and Haji in space with Space Ghost as his and Bandit too. Don't forget Bandit
Don't
as
forget
his
Bandit.
as his junior team. Meanwhile, Jan, Jason, Blip from Space Ghost go to Earth and hang out with Dr. Quest and Race Bannon. So we get to see the similar but yet different dynamics of those two pairings. It's been a lot of fun. That was my main visual thing that I wanted to get across, is to see Johnny and Haji in those junior Space Ghost uniforms.
That is so awesome. I love it. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to checking that out as time allows. I would like to talk to you about, and actually we discussed it very briefly last time you were on the channel, and that's Blood Squad 7. I know that I started reading the first couple issues myself, but that comic seems to be still going strong, if I'm not mistaken there.
Yeah. We don't know when to lay down and die with that one. So yeah, still going strong.
I really appreciate your approach with that, which in so many ways to me feels like the best part of kind of a 90s throwback. I guess for me, now that you've been on this book for a little while now, what is something that you've enjoyed from the process of doing Blood Squad 7 over at Image?
Well, the first 2 arcs were a lot of world building and a lot of, as you probably saw, there's been flashbacks to old Image comic series from the 92, 93, where we sort of traded out the guest appearances that originally showed up in those comics with our characters that are the sort of stand-ins for those characters. Well, we were after the first 2 arcs, we ran out of flashbacks. We kind of mined all of the Savage Dragon, Super Patriot, Spawn, Shadowhawk, even Wildcats. We kind of were able to mine that for for what it was worth.
Right.
But we burned through all those. So now with the arc that's starting in June with issue 9, we're taking kind of a sort of a hairpin turn with the series. And really, the thing about the early Image books is that as sort of bombastic as they were and as sort of over the top as they were, they did make an attempt to have some real world grounding. I mean, this wasn't Fantasyland. This was the sort of like the early Marvel universe, the world outside your window. So I was, we were thinking like, what would a government sponsored superhero team be used for in 2025? What's going on in the world that might employ these sort of, they're not exactly black ops, but they're certainly an elite squad.
Yeah.
Hence the name. So we're just like the analogous characters that they are, or at least the 90s version of them are. We're taking some current events, some sort of world hotspot events, and doing the analog of those events in the book and seeing how the Blood Squad 7 team deals with it. And they deal with it pretty head on. And what I found was I thought I was going to do a very political story. Mm-hmm. But as I was plotting it out and outlining this arc, it turned into much more, that became the backdrop of a much more very comic booky kind of story, which I'm pretty happy with. Yeah. So it's nifty. It's got real world analogy, story narrative and backdrop setting. But it's got that great sense of anything can happen in a superhero comic book that you want to see. It's got the good balance, which my favorite superhero comics always had that balance. I remember back in the 80s, the DC comics I loved, when the president showed up, Ronald Reagan,
Yeah.
Every time Ronald Reagan. And so they were trying to sort of put you in the real world with the DC Comics universe. So, that's always kind of stuck with me. So that's what we're trying to do here.
Right on. Well, very cool. And I'm excited to hear what you said about kind of it hitting that hairpin turn and going in a new direction. I'm interested to see how the team functions in that light. And I think that you guys are nailing it so far. I mean, everything I've read from Blood Squad 7 so far, I've really enjoyed. Like I said, the kind of cross section between, in many ways, a 90s Image era love letter, but also very contemporary. And I felt that from the first issue. And I think the melding of those two things, I don't know if it's because I'm a child of the 90s myself, but I really have enjoyed seeing it. So I'm eager to see what you have coming down the pipeline there.
Thanks, man. Nobody's ever used the 90s Image comics, the original launch series, as true historical backstory. Yeah. I think we're the first ones to do it, where those things, all those events and all those books happened 30 years ago, and we're treating it as it was 30 years ago, using it in real time. So Blood Squad 7 is sort of the next generation. And so it's great. It's sort of like how Marvel used the Golden Age as their backstory.
Yeah.
That we're using the early Image comics as our backstory, which is kind of weird to think about, but it's been that long.
I honestly love that. And I actually had someone on my YouTube channel recently comment about, hey, is Image a shared universe like Marvel or DC? And I kind of said, well, like Marvel and DC, maybe not as connective, but honestly, your series is a perfect example of kind of finding that connective tissue. And like you said, using that as kind of a golden age backdrop already for contemporary storytelling. And I think there's a lot of fanboys and girls out there like myself who love seeing that connective tissue. And I think that you and the team have such a novel approach to what you bring to that title. So anyway, I'm excited for what's coming. Not to pivot you too much, but you brought up some of your favorite stories from back in the day or in the 80s and DC Comics. If you don't mind me asking, just while we're speaking, what were some of those comic series for you? What were some of your greatest hits in the 80s or whenever that you just really fell in love with?
Well, when I was really, that whole DC post-crisis time where they reconfigured the universe and they thought simplified it. It didn't quite turn out to be quite that simple, but I was just the right mark for that. I mean, And that was when a lot of Marvel talent was migrating over to DC. A lot of independent talent was coming to DC. So things like the Giffen DeMatteis Maguire Justice League,
Mhm.
the Baron Jackson Guy's Flash,
Mhm.
Ostrander McDonald's Suicide Squad, um, Perez's Wonder Woman. Batman Year One was happening then. It was just really exciting times to be a comic book fan, and probably for me personally, the last time I invested in that shared universe concept to a really um, probably insane degree. But I was invested. I was really invested in how they were. How I mean, I knew about the pre-crisis multiple Earths, setup that DC used to have,
Right.
but I wasn't as deep into it at that time because I was young. But when
Right.
they did this sort of house cleaning, I was right there for it. The perfect age, the perfect level of interest, um, and in a way, it probably kept me in comics at an age when you most kids probably were about to grow out of them.
Sure.
But DC took this jump up in maturity's maybe not the right word, but complexity. They
Right.
took a jump up in complexity that kept me engaged, and I felt like, well, these are not necessarily kid comics anymore. They're not
Right.
adult comics, but they're kind of they just spoke to me. They spoke to my emerging knowledge of the world. You
Yeah.
know, so I mean, that's to me that's my golden age. That 86 to 88 DC Comics.
Yeah. That era of Flash, I think, is really underloved these days. But what I've read of that is phenomenal. I mean, honestly, it still holds toe to toe, I think, with a lot of what I've seen lately. I'm really happy you
My
brought that up.
favorite of that, my favorite of that group. It's my favorite of that group. And Mike Barron, big hero writer of mine when I was a teenager. I loved
Yeah.
Badger. I loved Nexus. And when he
Mhm.
came to DC, I was just all in.
Yeah.
And I mean, no pun intended. But that Flash book, short lived. His run only lasted about 14 issues.
Yeah.
And I remember asking him once I grew up and became a professional and got to
Yeah.
meet him. I said, why'd you leave that book? And he's like, he ran out of ideas. And instead of staying on and just kind of milking it, he
Yeah.
sort of kept the fans in mind and said, I'm tapped out. I'm passing it on, which I got a lot of
Wow.
respect for him for that.
Yeah, I don't always see that, and honestly, that run's still pretty tight.
Yeah, agreed.
Gosh, DC around that time too. I mean, it might have been a hair later, but I even think about like the Question, that run with Dennis Cowan and Denny
Oh yeah,
O'Neil, and or Mike Grell's Green Arrow. I think was
yep,
not too far later than that. And those books are, I really like those ones a lot from that period, just for how like gritty and kind of noir, like grounded they feel in a lot of ways.
oh yeah,
But yeah, some great stuff.
yep.
Um, Transitioning a bit, so we've talked about some love for DC. Did you ever have kind of a Marvel golden age for yourself that you plugged in at all?
Yeah, that was my first love.
Mhm.
That late '70s Marvel era. That sort of Jim Shooter's first editor in chief years, when
Yeah.
he was really getting the ducks in the row, and then from that you got these classic runs on Avengers, Frank
Mhm.
Miller on Daredevil, Walt Simonson on Thor, John Byrne on the Fantastic Four, just these
Mhm.
classic. Again, it was a generation of professionals who'd grown up on the '60s stuff, the Stan and Jack
Yeah.
and Ditko stuff, and they
Mhm.
were finally had a hold of the toys, and they had one foot in the past and one foot in the future, and so for me that 78 to 82 Marvel Comics,
Mhm.
83, 70, 77 to 83 probably.
Yeah.
That was my Marvel years. So I mean,
Yeah.
I consider myself a Marvel kid. That's
Mhm.
what I grew up on from when I was really young.
Right.
So yeah, I got a lot of love for those comics too.
Honestly, some of those are such heavy hitters. Obviously, Frank Miller's Daredevil, I've been thinking about a lot, and I've been so into that Daredevil Born Again show they put on Disney Plus recently. So I'm back, and not that I'm ever very far, but I'm all back in on Daredevil right now.
Yeah.
Anyway, while we're on Marvel, I know one of the other projects you're attached to right now is Weapon X-Men, which from what I gather is Wolverine, Cable, and my brain just
Deadpool.
dropped. Deadpool. Thank you. What can you tell me about Weapon X-Men?
Well, it's the concept, the high concept of Weapon X-Men is as opposed to most of the X-Men comics, most of the mutant-centric titles. This is not about the mutant metaphor. This is just a straight-up superhero comic. This is mutants versus the Marvel Universe. Yeah. So the first story arc, they go up against Baron von Strucker, classic, Hydra villain from way back. Issue 4, which comes out in May, they go up against a pretty obscure character called Red Ronin, who's basically a giant robot kaiju killer. Came out of the Godzilla comic that Marvel did in the 70s.
Man.
Our story is a kind of indirect sequel to Red Ronin's appearance in Avengers number 198 from like 1979, 1980, which again is a book that I grew up on. So I mean, it's a lot of fun. I'm getting to make those connections with my childhood favorites with this series. So it's a lot of fun, and it looks great. The artist Chris Cross kills it every issue, and so it's good fun.
Yeah, I love Chris Cross's stuff on Captain Marvel. I know I've been reading that from his run with Peter David. It's exceptional. If I can ask, and I'm not, if you're allowed to say it, great, but were you the one that picked those trio of characters, Cable, Deadpool, and Wolverine, or was that kind of the job that you jumped on board with, or?
No, I came up with the whole thing, the title, this concept, the lineup. It was not a cold pitch to Marvel because I've been around, so there's never a cold pitch. But it was definitely something that I said to Marvel, what about this? This could be, commercial. Look at these characters. They're about to have a movie that's going to be huge.
Yeah.
So
well, I love that. I love to hear that it was your direction there. What inspired you to pick those three specifically?
Well, I wanted what I considered the heavy hitters of the Marvel universe. I mean, in a post-Endgame landscape, where to me personally, I mean, this is just my opinion, that the classic Marvel characters, basically the Avengers, have had their day, and they've had their day in court, and we had 10 glorious years of, seeing that phase 1 through 3 happen. But once that Endgame happened, it sort of closed the book on that class of characters.
Sure.
And what took their place to me as the real movie stars, and history bore it out, is Wolverine, Deadpool, and Cable to a lesser extent. But Cable was, the co-star of Deadpool 2.
Yeah.
So they were to me the three movie stars that hadn't been overused in the Marvel stable. So that was my thinking there. And even in the first 3 issues, Baron von Strucker is from the movies too. He was in Avengers: Age of Ultron. So it's very accessibility minded, that series. If you've seen the movies, if you have a cursory knowledge of these characters, then you can read Weapon X-Men, and it's not mired down by a lot of continuity minutia. I know Wolverine has like 10 kids now. Deadpool has some kids running around, and Cable's got a teenage version of something. Whatever, all that bullshit, forget about it. This is just the essence of the characters in their basic commercial forms, and it's a lot of fun. It is basically, I'm not going to say it's a throwback because it's a very modern comic book, but the values that I think we're putting forth are very old school superhero comic book values.
Honestly, sometimes that is such a breath of fresh air. I feel like as an X-Men fan, I think that is so necessary sometimes, because I think one of the questions I get most, or one of the things I kind of grapple with X-Men, is I think it is one of the hardest properties comic book wise to break into, because what we talked about here, it's steeped in just decades of continuity that feels so layered. Like, I almost feel like, as big as the Marvel universe is, I feel like X-Men is its own microcosm of continuity with all of the different X books and even how they attach to different areas. So having something like yours that sounds like, with Weapon X-Men, like feeling like it's so accessible as an on-ramp to people that have maybe, like you said, seen those characters in live action or are passingly aware of them. I think that that's necessary, and honestly, that has me excited, even as kind of a deeper cut X-Men fan. So I love it.
Well, I hope so. I mean, look, the series has its share of deep cuts, but
Mhm.
it's, it works on multiple levels. I mean, Red Ronin is a deep
Yeah,
cut in issue
yeah,
4. I copped to that right away. But once I'd done the big first 3 issues to kind of get the team together and get things established,
Mhm.
that's when I decided, well, now I'm going to have some fun for me, and
Right.
get some Marvel continuity minutia in there for those of us who live in the cheap seats.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited to check that out as well. I mean, honestly, you're picking a couple of my favorite characters there with Deadpool and Wolverine. I am a Cable fan, but I feel like I'm just getting deeper into my like love of Cable. But I'm
Oh,
certainly here for
nice.
Weapon X-Men.
Cool.
um, Out of curiosity, I know you have such a wide bibliography as far as you've done, like, kind of commercial, more licensed characters, you've done big two characters, you've done a ton of kind of creator owned stuff as well. I guess at this point in your career, what excites you about jumping on new projects? Like, do you still really kind of get a high from adapting some of these other beloved characters as much as you do completely creator owned stuff, or does it just kind of depend?
Yeah, it depends on gig to gig. I mean, look, I love making comic books. So any kind of comic book that I'm making, I'll find what I love about it. Whether it's work for hire and it's characters have been around for longer than we've been alive, or
Mhm.
whether it's creating my own stuff that I've done at Image Comics for past 20 years,
Yeah.
or something like Blood Squad 7 where it's sort of a merging of it's a melding of the two. You
Yeah.
know, I love all of it, and each gig has its own challenges and its own rewards.
Mhm.
But uh, each new book that I do is an opportunity to have a new experience for myself as a creator, and take whoever's reading it down a new path that maybe they haven't gone down before. Um, but I mean, listen, it all comes down to I'm in love with this medium.
Mhm.
I've loved it since I was 5 years old, and have been in the game for about, oh God, now about 28 years.
Wow.
Um, I still can't believe I get to do it. You know,
Mhm.
it's still that really special thing. I never have taken it for granted. Never burnt out on it. It's the greatest job in the world. You know, so I'm going to keep doing it as long as I can do it.
I love that. And I love hearing that. And as we begin to kind of land the plane of our interview, I know we've talked about obviously Space Quest, which brought us together today. We've talked about Blood Squad 7 over at Image, and of course, just recently, Weapon X-Men over at Marvel. But for people that are just kind of finding your work or maybe want more from Joe Casey, what are a couple of your works that you would point to as maybe ones you're particularly proud of? Or you'd say, hey, if you check out some of my recent stuff, here's some other stuff for me in my catalog. I would say, hey, yeah, definitely try to get a copy of this.
I would say, I mean, on the company character stuff,
Mhm.
I did a run in the early aughts on Adventures of Superman that I'm pretty happy with, especially particularly the last year where there was no crossover things to deal with. It was just a straight year of just being able to tell the best Superman stories that I could tell, and it worked out really well. I mean, I'm really proud of that final year. Creator owned. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a big sort of Jack Kirby inspired cosmic series called Godland that I did with Tom Scioli. That's out there in trade paperback and big hardcover celestial editions, we called them.
Mhm.
Um, I did my last creator-owned project was a series called Junior Baker, the Righteous Faker, which in itself was a sequel to a book I did about 14 years ago called Butcher Baker, the Righteous Maker. So they're both kind of very on the sort of on the alternative or experimental side of comics. Because as much as I love like straight up commercial mainstream stuff, there's a side of my influences that's very, independent minded and experimental, like a lot of stuff in the 80s that was coming out independently from places like Dark Horse and Kamiko and First Comics. That's a big part of my background as well. So those series in particular, kind of I get to put, play in those waters a bit. And so if you like surreal storytelling and sort of gonzo comic book writing, those are the ones I would point to.
Awesome. Very cool. We appreciate that. And anyone else who's interested, there you go, right from Joe Casey himself. The last thing I just wanted to touch on, and this is something we just spoke about before we went live, is just you have a Substack now. What can you tell me of your Substack?
Well, it's twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. It's free for subscribers, which means I guarantee you will get your money's worth each and every newsletter that I do. But it's been me just kind of I guess it's turned out to be sort of a repository of like looking back at old work and talking about moments in my life that were important to me in terms of my comic book upbringing. And like I said, I look at old books of mine and kind of dissect them a little bit. I did a whole series of newsletters called Recollections, which was going back through my run on Uncanny X-Men issue by issue, where I showed a lot of behind the scenes stuff that nobody's ever seen, talked about what it was like at Marvel in 2001 making those comics and what went into making those comics, and spill a little tea here and there because you gotta do that. If it's your own platform, you might as well tell the truth as you see it.
Right.
Like just recently I posted, I did a newsletter about one of the first things I ever submitted to DC Comics as trying to break in as a writer was a Batman fill-in issue that I wrote a script for when I was 16 years old.
Wow.
And sent it in to DC, just like a unsolicited manuscript, basically. And, duly, but in timely fashion, got my rejection letter. However, at the bottom of the rejection letter, I got a handwritten note from the executive editor at the time, Dick Giordano, who's huge at the company, which was very encouraging and very like, we can't, we plot Batman months in advance, so we can't do a fill-in, but I like the script. It had some cool things in it. Maybe think about doing an original series. And it was, and I didn't, obviously I sent this in with it, there wasn't any note that said, hey, I'm 16 years old, by the way. No way.
Yeah.
I just sent it in with a submission. So the fact that I got that level of encouragement was great. So like, I think it was like a week or two ago on the Substack, I posted, original script pages from my electric typewriter that I typed the script out on. I put up the letter from DC with Giordano's handwritten note. So it's fun to talk about these things, but have the receipts to show. Yeah. So that's been part of the Substack. And when a new issue of Weapon X-Men comes out, I'll do a newsletter that goes through all the Easter eggs that are in each issue and shows the source where they came from, and all the things that I think might be interesting to people who are into that kind of process information. So there's a lot of stuff to it. It's been going on since I think October of last year. So there's a whole archive of material you can go back and look at and watch me flail myself in public twice a week.
Awesome. Well, wow. I have to admit, I am late to the party there, but I am exceedingly excited based on what you just said. Just behind the scenes stuff of being in the industry. I love that you said it's kind of a Weapon X-Men companion as far as you pointing stuff out as issues are released. Yep. And you said one of my favorite words, which is it's free. It's free to sign up for your Substack. So if you're like me, definitely check it out after listening to this interview, Joe Casey's Substack. Don't miss out on Weapon X-Men. Don't miss out on the ongoing Blood Squad 7. And of course, please, please, please check out Get It Pulled at your LCS for Space Quest. Joe Casey, thank you so much for coming back on the channel. It's been delightful to talk to you, sir. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching.
Thanks for having me, man. Good to see you again.
Alrighty, bye. Thank you for watching my interview today with Joe Casey. I hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to leave this video a like, comment, and share it with a friend. Thanks, and have a good one.